From the Oregon State University's Extension Service, you are listening to In the Woods with the Forestry and Natural Resources Program. This podcast brings the forest to listeners by sharing the stories and voices of forest scientists, land managers, and enthusiastic members of the public. Each episode, we will bring you research and science-based information that aims to offer some insight into what we know and are still learning about forest science and management. Stick around to discover a new topic related to forests on each episode. Did you know that the In the Woods podcast won an award? That's right, we've been nationally recognized by our peers as being one of the leaders in providing natural resources content and education through a podcast. But what do you think? Do you like the topics we've been covering? Are there topics we're missing that you'd like us to cover? How's the quality of the episodes? We've developed a short survey where you can let us know how you feel. Head over to our website at inthewoodspodcast.org to access the survey, or you can find a link in this episode's show notes. The survey should only take about 5 to 10 minutes for you to complete, and when you're done, you'll have the option to enter into a drawing to win some In the Woods swag. We've got magnets, stickers, coffee mugs, and t-shirts for you to choose from. We really need your help, so please take a moment to fill out the survey. The feedback we receive will not only help with improving the podcast, but also help us in the Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program to ensure we're reaching all our audiences. We look forward to bringing you more engaging content on a wide range of topics with guests from diverse backgrounds, experiences, and expertise. From all of us at In the Woods, thanks again for listening. Thank you for joining us on another episode of In the Woods. I'm Lauren Grand, Oregon State University Extension Forester and Associate Professor of Practice, and I'll be your host for today's episode. So today's episode is all about how storms damage trees and what that means for our rural and urban forests. So in this episode, we hope to accomplish a basic understanding of why trees are damaged in these types of storms and to give you some tips and tricks for mitigating the damage, as well as cleaning up and restoring the area if you need to. And to help us accomplish this today, I brought 2 guests to the podcast. So if you can help me welcome them. Our first guest is Glenn Ahrens. Glenn is the OSU Extension Forestry and Natural Resources Agent that serves Clackamas and Hood River counties. I'm really lucky to know Glenn as a colleague and have had the opportunity to work with him on lots of projects. He's a very knowledgeable guy. So thanks for joining us, Glenn.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks. Hi, everyone.
And then, so Glenn, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into your role in forestry?
Okay. Well, I started out more kind of on the research side of forest ecology and management. And when I came to OSU for a master's program, I worked with some extension professors on campus. And working with the extension specialists there, it helped me realize that I really wanted to put research to work on the ground, put our research-based knowledge to work and help people on the ground. So I got a job as extension forester. I was lucky to get that back in 2001. So I started as a county extension agent in the old terminology there on the North Coast. And then I moved over to Clackamas and covering Clackamas, Marion, and Hood River counties in 2012. So that's what I've been doing for over 20 years.
Well, great to have you, Glenn. Thank you. And our other guest today is Scott Altenhoff. Scott is the program manager for urban and community forestry assistance for the Oregon Department of Forestry. And I had the pleasure of meeting Scott when I first started at Oregon State, when he was an urban forester in the city of Eugene. And I've had an amazing opportunity learning more and more about urban forestry from Scott's expertise. So glad to be able to partner with you again in your new role, Scott, in a statewide position. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lauren. Great to be here. And looking forward to taking part in this conversation.
So, Scott, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into urban forestry?
You bet. It's been a long and circuitous route. I first started my forestry or urban and community forestry career picking cones. I got a job picking various types of conifer cones for reforestation and just fell in love with the tree biology and ecology and working on something so tangible. It was clear that there were such real results to the work I was doing, and then branched out, as it were, into on-the-ground surveys, so stand exams, and at the time they were called current vegetation surveys, and now they're called FIA, Forest Inventory and Analysis. So a lot of wildlife surveys and vegetation surveys, and then made my way into commercial arboriculture, caring for trees in an urban setting. And then from there, moved into urban forestry with municipal urban forestry. And that's how we, of course, first got to know one another. And for the last 2 years, I've been here working for the state of Oregon as an urban and community forester.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. So obviously another really well-experienced participant. And I'm lucky to have the two of you on the podcast to interview. So thank you. So I guess to the task at hand, this January, we had a pretty substantial ice storm in the Willamette Valley, and that caused some pretty significant damage. But this is only the most recent of events that we've had. Weather events with heavy snow, ice, rain, and wind around the state have the potential to really cause a lot of damage to our local forests, both in and out of town. So I'm hoping that we can sort of shape our conversation a little bit about what happens during these events and what that means for our both urban and more rural forests. But so these events in forestry, we tend to call them disturbances. So Glenn, can you tell me a little bit, or can you share with us quickly what role disturbance plays in forest ecosystems?
Yeah. So, we look at disturbance as, anything that really opens up the canopy or disturbs the vegetation in the soil and kind of makes room for new trees and plants to get started. So disturbance is a major driver of forest regeneration in particular and ecosystem change. And, wildfire is by far the most common and important disturbance in our Northwest forests. It opens up growing space for regeneration of trees like Douglas fir and other species, particularly ones that need a lot of sunlight. But of course, the storms like the wind and the ice storm that we had recently, is another major disturbance that, will kill or damage trees and also open up, growing space and allow for new plants to get started. Other disturbances like, floods or landslides or an insect and disease outbreak, there's other things that, again, kill some trees or damage trees and kind of make room for new things to get going. So that's the role of disturbance. It's the major driver in our forest ecosystems here, particularly in the West and the Northwest.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. And I think if we think about sort of on a landscape scale, some of these disturbances can be quite small or just relationally to the Pacific Northwest don't seem to make that much of an impact to our forests, but except for locally. But in these sort of wide scale circumstances, they can really change, it sounds like they can create a significant change in the forest vegetation and potentially forest health.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, the first impact on forest health, if you will, is one tree at a time, which Scott will probably talk about. But the tree mortality, the damage caused by the storm to each tree or to the groups of trees, is obviously a big impact on the health of those trees. But another thing to think about, the impact of having all these damaged trees or trees that fall down and parts of trees, is you end up with a lot of debris on the ground, woody debris. And then that really feeds a lot of insects, that they feed and they breed in a lot of this fresh debris and may build up populations in these damaged trees and wood on the ground. They also could attack the damaged trees that are weakened by losing parts of their crown. And I should note, when we use the term crown, we're talking about all the living green foliage of a tree, the whole package that drives the photosynthetic machinery. So that's the crown of a tree. And when trees lose a major part of their crown, and then across the whole forest, a lot of crowns are damaged. Those can be weakened trees that are vulnerable to attack by insects. So that's one of the forest health consequences of major storms and damage events that may, breed a lot of insects in the debris, which can then lead to a local outbreak that might then affect otherwise healthy trees in the same area. Another impact, of course, is that a lot of the debris from storm damage is going to increase fire hazard. And if that goes across a large area, we may have a few seasons of much higher fire hazard with all that fuel drying out on the ground, if we're not able to clean that up. So that's just a little bit of the aspect of these disturbances on forest health.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. And thanks for mentioning the fact that, forest health starts on the individual tree level. So we'll toss it to you, Scott, then. Can you drill down the view a little bit then to that single tree and share with us how these weather events tend to affect individual tree species as opposed to forests of trees?
You bet. Happy to do so. So, historically, those of us who have been in the Pacific Northwest for several decades, I think we'd be inclined to say that ice storms of this sort of severity have historically been quite rare. One of our biggest landscape scale disturbances that really impacted the forests and urban forests in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest was the Columbus Day storm of 1962. That was a windstorm that really was catastrophic. In my tenure, about 3 decades as an urban forester, we've had decadal windstorms once every 10 years or so of consequence, but not many ice storms until the past 10 years. They seem to be becoming more severe and more frequent. So my prescriptions for individual trees in terms of pruning and preparing them to withstand storm forces has changed quite a bit over the last decade. Some of the impacts that ice storms in particular can have, looking at a tree scale, trees in our area can withstand, maybe a 1/4 inch of wet or heavy ice or frozen precipitation. But once it reaches a critical point, you'll start to see significant limb failure, starting with large overgrown scaffold limbs and such, or failures at weak attachment points where you have maybe what we call a bark inclusion in between stems. So rather than having solid wood attaching to codominant leads, you have a bunch of bark and a poorly attached spot, or if you have decay pockets in limbs or trunks. So as the ice or snow gets thicker, you start seeing not just branch breakage, but potentially entire tree failure, main stems failing, as well as whole trees failing. And that can be exacerbated if we have saturated soils, that is, soils that have been wetted and have lost their holding strength. Many times when a whole tree will blow over or fall over as a result of snow or ice, it's not the tree's roots that failed necessarily, but oftentimes it's the tree's ability, the soil holding ability. So as any gardener can probably relate, in the early spring when there's still a bunch of soil moisture, you can pull a weed pretty easily. Once the summer weather hits and the soils dry out, it becomes a lot more challenging to pull a weed out. And the same applies for a tree. If the soils are wetted or really saturated, it's fairly easy to get that root system to give. But once the soils are dry and hard, the holding strength is far greater. So yeah, at a whole tree level, branch failure is typical in an ice storm, but you can see entire tree failure, the stem at weak points or poor attachment points. And those weak points can result from previous injuries or decay or defects in the stem. So that's something that is easy to detect beforehand. And as an arborist and urban forester, that's something that we always advise folks to pay attention to. There's a lot of prevention that can be undertaken, preventative maintenance or planning that can prevent catastrophic damage.
Hey, thanks, Scott. I really liked that example, the gardening example. I understand the concept, of saturated soils and trees falling over, but to relate it back to that gardening example was really great and sort of made my brain click a little bit there. So thanks for that. Okay, so and there it sounds like are preventative measures that you can take depending on the type of tree. But before we get there, can you share with us if there are certain types of trees that can withstand these events better than others or are less likely to have points of failure, as you've mentioned?
You bet. My view of this has shifted significantly over the last 10 years. I used to think that our oaks and our hardwoods that were known for their hard, dense wood were just generally stronger and more storm resistant than, say, a soft wooded tree like a cottonwood or even some of our conifers. But these recent ice storms over the last decade have made me realize that sometimes having that inherent flexibility, the wood might not be quite so strong. However, if it can give, it can often withstand an ice storm better than a tree that does not budge. It holds strong, holds strong, holds strong, and then fails entirely. So in the recent ice storms, from my experience, some of our native oaks, like our California black oaks and our Oregon white oaks, and even some of the non-native oaks like red oaks or tin oaks, suffered really significant damage, while simultaneously trees that are typically thought to be weaker wooded, like cottonwood or even some of our maples, and some of our conifers, they weathered the storms just fine. And I'm always amazed at giant sequoia. It's very rare to see branch failures on giant sequoia, but yet their wood has historically been known to be much weaker and not suitable for structural purposes for lumber than many other species of conifer. But those quote unquote stronger species like Doug fir, like ponderosa pine, and spruce even, I've seen a lot more ice damage. So I think it's fair to say I'm still learning, but each tree has its own strategy, as it were, evolutionary strategy that can serve it well under certain circumstances, maybe fares well with winds and high rains, but doesn't fare well with frozen rain or heavy snow. So I think the short answer is there are differences among species, and it depends on the nature of the disturbance, really, and the context in which the tree is growing. Hopefully that's not too vague.
I was just gonna say no simple answer for us, huh, Scott?
Not, unfortunately not.
Well, that's okay. I feel like that's the way the cookie crumbles, if you will, for ecology in general. So
Or
it all depends. Go ahead.
or the tree crumbles, as it were.
Oh yeah.
And what I can say definitively and provide some clarity is that regardless of the species or the characteristics of the particular characteristics of the tree in question, there are many pruning practices or preventative measures that can be undertaken to help increase resilience under storm forces. So judicious pruning that can bring in gangly or overgrown limbs, reducing tip weight and reducing the overall branch or tree's height to diameter ratio. So not doing too much because that can predispose it to problems as well. But making strategic cuts, weight reduction, so that if it does get a bit more frozen precipitation weight, the limb is well suited to handle it.
Okay. So at least there are ways to, as you mentioned earlier, prevent potentially some of the amount of weight that will be on each of these branches.
That's correct.
Okay, let's zoom out again and talk to Glenn. So what about thinking about this more in a forest context in terms of maybe we're not looking at the individual tree being affected by the ice damage because in the forest we're thinking more of a community of trees. Are there maybe certain stages of forest development or forest types in which we're seeing there are more tree vulnerabilities?
Yeah, in the forest, we are looking at, larger areas and larger groups of trees. And we often refer to that as, a grove of trees, or a forester looks at a stand of trees that kind of are all in a somewhat similar condition or came up together across acres of land. And the way that the trees grow up together over time and the spacing between the trees, the amount of crowding and competition among the trees really has a big influence on, the way that the stand and the way individual trees in the stand are going to weather stresses and strains of storm events. So it really has a big influence in terms of the tree characteristics and how vulnerable they might be to breakage or tipping over. And key part of that is that trees that are overcrowded, which often is the case, a group of trees come up together after something, regenerates a patch of trees, like the last windstorm or fire. But if they grow up and they get pretty crowded, then you could end up in a condition where a lot of the trees are kind of tall and spindly because they're, competing with other trees, and they develop fairly small crowns, again, kind of thin stems. And also their root systems are smaller and less well developed because of the small crown that they have and, the competition. So those are often more vulnerable to losing their top. And then when they lose their top, the whole crown is gone because they just don't have very much. And they also can be vulnerable to tipping over because they have weaker root systems or smaller root systems. So, high winds or heavy ice can take down a lot of trees at a time. In fact, whole swaths of trees if they're all kind of in this vulnerable condition. And that often happens, during certain stages of development, like as the forest grows up and things are fairly crowded, starting maybe 15 to 30 years old. That can be a vulnerable phase before, trees kind of sort themselves out into some of the winners and losers. And the winners tend to be bigger, stronger trees, that might withstand the storms. So trees that do have more growing space and a bigger crown, they'll have stronger stems, stronger root systems. They'll be, kind of stouter and stronger stems and branches. And they may lose their tops or they may lose branches. You may have noticed in some of the ice storms that, some large, strong Doug firs lost branches, but they retain enough of their crown that they're going to survive and recover. Whereas, again, those smaller, weaker trees may just fail completely or lose their crowns. Now, another aspect of stage of development is, of course, trees are growing taller over time, and taller trees are more exposed to wind. They're going to have more force of the wind on that larger length of stem and crown, which then puts more leverage at ground level. So just by virtue of height, when trees get up over 100 feet tall, they're going to be suffering a lot more force from wind and therefore have to be even stronger to withstand that.
That's so interesting that you both sort of brought up this concept of height to width ratio almost, that even in forest systems where trees are maybe competing with each other for light, and so they're growing taller and they're putting less resources into diameter growth, wind is really affecting potentially their health, that's also an important ratio individually for trees. That's an interesting concept. I didn't quite think about that, trees standing together or individually would really be affected in a strength ability from snapping or blowing over from this height width ratio.
Yeah, I think of it in terms of, we often even talk about a height to diameter ratio, which gets to be kind of a technical thing. But you take the height of a tree in the same units and you divide it by the diameter of the tree. And when those ratios get up over 100 to 120, that's an indication of a tree that may be weak or unstable. And we like to have the ratios more like in the 60 to 80 range for a really stout, strong tree.
All right, great. Thanks. Well, Glenn, I was thinking about it earlier, and I can always count on a seasoned extension agent to define terms. And so you've been doing really well with that. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about the stages of development and then also some of the things that in forests that might cause trees to be more vulnerable. Are there management activities that foresters might take on to help mitigate effects of these storms?
Yeah, when we're looking at stands or groups of trees, and I talked about, the crowding, the growing space, the most basic thing we do is control, the spacing, and make sure the trees don't get overcrowded if we have the capacity to manage it that carefully. So, the main thing we do to improve the stability and resilience of trees in the forest is that we manage that spacing to give each tree more growing space, and they'll develop a better crown, which then promotes stronger stems and root systems. So you can start by planting, if you're starting with a site that's recovering from a clearing or a disturbance, or just a new planting area, start out by spacing the trees out, some designed amount. And that really depends on, what your overall goals are and how often you're going to be able to come back and thin, for instance. But whatever you start at, it works for a while, and then trees are going to tend to get overcrowded. And so then thinning is the next thing we can do to intervene and remove some trees to leave more space so that the remaining trees can grow stronger and have good crowns. During thinning, we often would, take out weaker trees, some of the trees that have forks, some of those individual tree characteristics that Scott was talking about that may make a tree prone, to weakness. In a forestry context, we would be looking at just perhaps removing those trees instead of pruning them or trying to help them, because there's plenty of other trees that we want to leave for the future that would take up the space. So then we leave the better trees to develop more stable forest conditions over time. And a key concept here is that as the trees are growing larger, they're going to need more growing space. And so if you start out with a couple hundred trees in an area and they're doing fine and not overcrowded, it's just a matter of time before they start to crowd each other. And then it's a question of whether we thin them out, or whether nature thins them out, or they start just killing each other through competition, and you have kind of winners and losers emerge. And, some of the subtleties of this is a lot of times by accident, there's a lot of differences between trees, even though they're growing up together, and the forest will sort itself out and maybe doesn't really need that much thinning. But in other cases, they're all growing together and kind of equally overcrowded, and in which case thinning could be really important, to prevent the trees from becoming weak, or the forest as a whole of being vulnerable to, more wind and storm damage.
Okay, so on the forest scale, it seems like the story is based on density and an ability of a single tree to be able to access resources in competition with the other trees that are in the forest.
Yep, that's often how it goes, especially here in the West, where trees tend to be coming up together after a major disturbance, and then they're kind of competing with each other kind of at the same age range. Other kinds of forests, like some of our coastal rainforests, or, in tropical forests where there's just a lot more mixes of tree ages and sizes and species, it's a little bit different story. Although individually, one tree at a time, you can still apply those same, attributes to look at what's a strong tree and what's a weak tree. But here in the West, we have large patches that come up at the same time, and sometimes they can develop into a large area of vulnerable trees, as it happens if they're overcrowded.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. Okay, so Scott, let's turn it back over to you and think about our urban or street trees, or more on an individual tree basis. Since in the forest, we are considering individual trees as they interact with each other, but that might not be the whole story for urban trees. And it sounds like pruning is one management activity that you mentioned to help mitigate these effects. Are there others that landowners can do?
You bet. So yeah, it's great that we're differentiating what I like to refer as intensively managed trees. So those are trees in urban areas that we have the means and actually need to manage tree by tree. And then we have extensively managed areas, natural stands and forest areas that it would neither be feasible nor desirable to manage tree by tree and try and manage at the stand level. So in terms of intensively managed areas those could be street trees, park trees, residential property trees, where there are hazard implications. If a tree were to fail in a forest, not a big deal. But if a sizable tree were to fail in an urban setting or suburban setting, the impacts could be catastrophic. So more proactive management or intensive management is required. And so in addition to pruning, which is typically the most cost-effective way to prevent storm damage. I'll take a step back. It's also one of the key best ways to prevent storm damage is through good planning, and that can entail species selection, that can involve siting, so making sure that the soil conditions are ideal so that you grow well-formed, healthy trees as opposed to trees that are just struggling along, growing up. And even in an intensively managed scenario, the same forest principles apply. If a tree is not getting full light exposure on all sides, it may be induced to reach for the sky and exceed its height to diameter ratio along the lines of what Glenn described. So just making sure that conditions are such. And we know that trees can actually increase their strength when they are subject to minor wind forces or movement. So if a tree never experiences wind forces or movement, say it's in a sheltered area behind a building or maybe a hillside, and it's not tested by prevailing winds, and then suddenly a rare or freak wind comes from a previously unknown direction, that can be catastrophic. So just trying to create conditions that the tree has a chance to reinforce itself. So especially when the tree is quite small, it's important not to create, many people will keep a tree staked for way too long. Ideally, when planting new trees, it's good to stake them for the first year or so, but a best practice is to remove those stakes as quickly as possible so that the tree is induced to reinforce itself, to develop that important trunk taper that helps it remain strong. If the tree is never called to reinforce itself because it's staked or sheltered, that can lead to problems down the line. So good planning, that is always the most cost-effective way, preventing problems rather than trying to cure them. And then, as mentioned, pruning is a very important way to prevent problems. And then if upon inspection, conducting regular inspections is a very cost-effective approach to preventing problems. And if problems are identified, you can, in some cases, cable a tree, provide supplemental support systems that allow the tree to reinforce itself. A dynamic cabling scenario, for instance, that is, it doesn't come into play. Say you've got a forked tree and the tree is perceiving wind forces. It's being induced to reinforce itself. But if a really heavy wind comes, the cable will become taut and it will be prevent it from experiencing catastrophic failure. So regular inspections, maybe by every 2 years would be a great intervention and preventative measure. And then in some cases, installing support systems, and those could be cables or braces or even props in certain cases. And then making sure that the tree's root system, or the critical root zone, as we like to refer to the area surrounding the tree's trunk, making sure that the conditions are ideal to keep tree vitality high, because a tree that is healthy and doing its thing will be inherently stronger than a tree that is just limping along and barely eking out its existence.
Okay, so speaking of a tree limping along, those were great examples of how one might be able to prevent damage or deal with some potential damage. Let's say that the ice storm has come through and now there has been damage. Are there ways to assess how healthy the trees are afterwards, and if they're able to bounce back from this event, or if, the tree is too far gone?
Yeah, there sure are ways to assess whether a tree is worth retaining and capable of being retained and regenerating or regrowing and responding to that damage, or in some cases, if it wiser to remove it. That will once again vary species to species and site by site, but qualified tree risk assessor will be able to put all those pieces together and in 99% of situations be able to make a prescription for treatment that will help facilitate long-term survival and response. What you don't want to do is leave a known problem in place, and that those known problems resulting from ice storms could be widowmaker limbs, those broken limbs that are detached or poorly attached, and that could fall if a wind kicks up or if another snow event occurs. So making sure to remove those broken limbs. In some cases, making a cut back to the main trunk of the tree might be best, but in many cases, figuring out just the bare minimum amount of removal that's required that would allow the tree to regenerate. And there are many trees that may look terrible shortly after a catastrophic ice storm, but that can actually regrow its substantial portions of its lost crown and recover. In the 2016 ice storm that hit the Eugene Springfield area, there were trees that I wondered whether they would be good candidates for retention. They looked terrible, and it took a good 5 to 6 years for them to regrow. But by and large, most of those trees have regenerated and might require some supplemental pruning just to thin some heavy epicormic sprouts or thick sprouting that could predispose them to problems. But yeah, there's a lot of work that can be done to assess the tree, do some response pruning, and many of those trees are just fine years afterwards. And in some cases, after a decade or more, you may not even be able to tell that there was pre-existing damage.
And I think it was you who said to me once that trees didn't need pruning before humans, right? Need pruning is maybe not the right term, but trees weren't pruned before humans, that this is their response to various climatic events. And, they ecologically and evolutionarily needed to be able to figure out a way to rebound from them.
Yeah, that's so true. And if it weren't for the risk issue, there may not be a need to prune, but in urbanized or heavily populated areas where there is risk potential, we want to be proactive. It's just not worth having someone be injured or suffering significant property damage, or in the worst case scenario, having a fatality. And that leads me to, it's very easy after a severe ice storm like this for there to be an overreaction, for folks to unnecessarily remove trees because of perceived risk or just general risk aversion. It's understandable, but what we have to remember is the benefits of trees in urban areas are so many that we want to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to remember that trees provide essential benefits, and the wise thing to do is remove or reduce the costs and liabilities associated with trees, but to retain and maximize tree benefits. So just a good reminder.
Yeah, thanks. And speaking of benefits, maybe taking this question on a little bit of a hike, but are there benefits to the damage? Can trees being damaged in a storm cause some sort of ecological benefit outside of the obvious, risk to people or property?
That's a great question. And it's also important to remember that our landscapes are really disturbance. They depend on disturbance for many of the ecological processes. So habitat potential is definitely enhanced in forest stands where there's branch breakage. That's in heavily disturbed stands, that's where we see some of the greatest habitat potential for avian species and for mammals of all sorts, and for invertebrates and things like that. So Thank you for asking that question. Thinking about the big picture, forests are so much more than just trees, and urban forests are so much than just trees. There is a whole web of life that depends on trees and arboreal structures and habitats. So, yes, trees have evolved to withstand storm forces and then respond, and various organisms depend upon that morphology or that form of the tree. Branch epicormic sprouting or thick sprouting that comes secondarily, so as opposed to the primary branch structure. And avian habitats, so species of bird that are dependent, that need to excavate their holes. So woodpeckers and sapsuckers and flickers and actually dozens of species need dead or dying wood to make a livelihood, getting insects and creating nesting sites, and then many other species as well. So it is important to take a philosophical view that although in modern life we don't like uncertainty or quote unquote defects, those defects that result from storm forces are actually highly beneficial in the broader scheme of things.
Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for the reference to the dying wood and dead wood. Our wildlife biologist friends will probably get excited to hear that. Especially, we had a whole episode on it, on dead wood, on the podcast. So if that sort of stuff excites you, go back and check that episode.
I'm all about Sappers Islet habitat. Love it. Thank you.
Glenn, you've been quiet for a while. Can you I know that, wildlife is probably a major benefit as well in the forested system. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that within our rural forests, landscape forests, or any others that you know of?
Yeah, sure. In terms of, what we're just talking about, when you look at damaged trees in a forest setting, there's not so much of an urgent need to clean it all up necessarily. Well, I guess we'll talk about that a bit in terms of cleaning up debris. But that value for wildlife is something that you have even more opportunities in the forest to leave damaged or dead trees. In terms of like the forest canopy, a tree that gets damaged or set back is often going to just be fall behind anyway, and so the trees that are not damaged in the area are going to take over and thrive. But that damaged tree then might become, good habitat, either as a standing dead snag or a tree that has damage that becomes then, more suitable for wildlife habitat. So in the forest, there's a lot of opportunities, and in fact, often a primary goal to leave some of those trees or even create dead or damaged trees where there aren't any because of their value for wildlife habitat. The insects that feed on the dead wood, the birds, bats and small mammals that feed on the insects, and then, amphibians also in moist wood, rotting wood. So, we can often afford to leave those in the forest where there's not such a concern about risks and hazards to life and property.
Yes, thank you, Glenn. That's a great way to think about how to look at it and make space for all of our critters. You alluded to this a little bit in your answer, though. You were talking about cleaning things up and thinking about how to, how we might clean up after damage or after one of these storms. Can you talk a little bit about how you might think about cleaning up after storm damage while still finding ways to, take advantage of those benefits you were talking about?
Yes, it's kind of a balancing act because, storms do make a big mess. And in the forest, we don't necessarily need to clean it all up the way we like to do or need to do in developed areas. But then, too much woody debris, I referred earlier to, tuning into hazards for insects that breed in fresh down wood that might become, a forest health threat. That varies by species. So you kind of have to get an expert perhaps or learn yourself, pines and firs and versus hardwoods, they all have different, kinds of insects and different hazards depending on the species of tree. But balancing out, the excess debris that might be a health hazard, also then really concerned about fire hazards. But on the other hand, if there's a large, scattered larger trees that we can leave as snags, or trees that have fallen that we leave as down wood. There's a certain amount that, is safe to leave and is not a big fire hazard, especially some of the bigger pieces, that hold a lot of moisture. And so we can leave those for those wildlife benefits that we were talking about. So it does become this kind of a balancing act, because a lot of the finer debris, things less than, 3 to 5 inches in diameter, that can be a huge fire hazard, also an obstacle to getting around. And we often want to clean that up. And how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of different options, depending on your tools and the capacity you have to do the work, or the funding to pay others to do the work, and the scale of it. Acres and acres is a big job. Making lots of firewood, we can pile and burn debris. We can also do controlled burning and make charcoal and biochar, which is kind of an up and coming alternative to just complete, removal or consumption in burn piles. We have, tractors and machinery and even masticators that just shred a lot of that material and spread it out. In the forest, we can cut things into smaller pieces and get them in contact with the ground so they'll go back to the earth faster and not be such a fire hazard. And there's also some strategic, piling of smaller logs even to make, a linear pile that acts more like a larger log that concentrates the fuel so it's not a widespread fire hazard, but also then provides, wildlife habitat in sort of a concentrated habitat pile, if you will. So there's quite a few options to consider there, but it is kind of a balancing act for how much you allow to go back for habitat and for soil, organic matter, et cetera, versus, cleaning up the mess and reducing the fire hazards.
Well, that's what makes it fun, right? Is coming up with these different ecological puzzles and trying to figure out how to make that balancing act work.
Yep, there's more than one right answer.
Right. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'll toss it back over to you, Scott. So we've talked a little bit, about, the damage and some mitigation things, but, we have a lot of people that were quite affected by this ice storm in a lot of urban centers in the Willamette Valley. And so it would be great if you could maybe share with us some tips for cleaning up a home landscape, options for, I think disposing of material is probably a lot more difficult in an urban setting versus, say a forested setting. And then maybe if there were any ways that people could use the wood as opposed to getting rid of it, if there were landscape uses to that.
You bet. So I think it's fair to say in a developed area in cities and towns, the most common method of disposal of brush and small diameter pieces of wood is to chip it or cart it off to either using the municipal green waste bin or carting it off in a truck to a local wood recycler. I'm really glad that Glenn mentioned biochar. I think from a ecological and sustainability standpoint, that is going to be an important technology. It's an ancient technology. It's a fancy word for charcoal. But it has known soil improvement characteristics. So when you, as opposed to chipping up branch material or storm debris and having it go into small pieces that quickly decompose and revolatize as atmospheric CO2, biochar persists as sequestered carbon, and it has amazing properties for improving soils. And one of the greatest threats to trees we have in urban areas is soil degradation. And that degradation can come about as a result of extended or ecological drought or compaction activities that could occur from vehicle traffic or construction activities or even foot traffic. So anytime you can improve soils, make them more resilient and more able to promote quality root growth, and the two basic properties for promoting good tree root growth are good drainage. You don't want soil for water to perch in the soil and keep it saturated. You want it to drain. But at the same time, you want the soil to have lots of air spaces and resist compaction. And biochar allows us to have both of those properties, and it sequesters carbon. And I just can't say enough positive things. We're seeing that soils amended with the right proportion of biochar are so much better than soils that have not been amended. So I'm a big advocate for it. So, but if you can't have your brush or woody material turned into biochar, chipping it is one option, and mulch can be a great thing for landscapes. It can help improve soil quality and improve habitat quality and retain soil moisture as well. And sorry, that was one thing I failed to mention about biochar. It really helps soils retain moisture. Not only does it promote drainage, but it helps increase soil moisture, which in the face of changing climate and ecological drought is a primary challenge. So pruning and chipping the brush material. And then as we talked about earlier, it's not often necessary to remove a dead or dying tree or a failed tree from the landscape if it doesn't have hazard potential, and if it could serve habitat potential. It can actually add a lot of value to a landscape. In my yard, I had a 3-foot diameter fail in 2016, very close to the house, and it stands at about 18 feet tall, but it just sheared off because of heavy weight. I've retained it as a habitat snag, and I've had pileated woodpecker visiting, and there's a myriad of moss and lichen species and mushroom species growing upon it, and it's just a wonder to behold. As a backyard habitat enthusiast, I can spend hours sitting on my patio, drinking a beverage, just watching the snag, and I see new things every day. So big advocate for that as well. And if folks are interested in attracting wildlife of various sorts, no better way to do that than, as you folks alluded, getting creative with the leftover materials, doing piles for reptiles and amphibians of woody debris. You do want to be mindful not to leave a lot of wildfire ladder fuels around, or to pose problems for the landscape. But in general, if those piles aren't too thick or have ground contact, the moisture levels will remain high and they can do their thing.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I'm always an advocate for creating wildlife habitat, especially reptiles and amphibians, my little side passion. So thanks for pointing those things out. I think you've both covered quite a bit of really useful and interesting information. So thank you so much for joining us. I guess I have one more question for both of you, and that's if there's anything else that you feel like is important for people listening to know about, how trees respond to these different types of storms and how that impacts our landscape.
I'll defer to you, Glenn.
I guess I should say, with all that we talked about, if folks are wondering, you can follow up with us and with some of your other local resources wherever you live in Oregon, and to learn more, explore with OSU Extension and Department of Forestry and others. And oftentimes you can get somebody to come out even and take a look with you, especially if you give us enough time. So just pursue learning more as you need to, and get in touch with us.
I will just echo that. Our team really loves to provide customer service and meet folks and engage in collaboration and problem solving. And I guess last thing I'll say is how important prevention is. We know that we're likely to continue to suffer extreme ice storms and weather events, and the old adage, a stitch in time can save 9. Preventative maintenance, although it is an expense, it can really pay off in dividends. So I would encourage folks to inspect your trees and prune trees as needed, or in certain cases, remove trees as needed in urban areas, and just be proactive rather than reactive wherever possible. It will really pay off.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you both so much for joining me. I just want to let our audience know not to leave yet because I have a lightning round coming up. But in between that, I just wanted to thank you for joining me. I know this is somewhat of a heavy topic, and there could be some people that were hoping to learn more because the storm was quite, an impact on their personal property. So thank you for sharing some of those resources, some of those opportunities for people to be able to see some benefit and know how to prevent from future situations. Just a reminder to our listeners that if any questions came up during our topic today that you didn't have answers, please feel free to drop us a comment or send us a message on our website. That's inthewoodspodcast.com. And after this little ditty, we'll ask our presenters or guests really some questions. Okay, so I'm going to ask you our lightning round questions. We'll alternate so that one can answer and then the other. And I'll start with Glenn. So Glenn, what's your favorite tree?
I have to say Coast Redwood. And I grew up in the redwoods in some parts of my youth, and they're just great trees. They're long-lived. They grow to be giants. They're adapted to survive fire, and they even sprout back if they're fallen or burned. So they live again. So Coast Redwood.
Okay, good choice. Scott, how about you?
Well, like Glenn, I'm partial to the Sequoia sempervirens, the coast redwood, but I'm also very partial to our Oregon white oak. They play such an important role in the landscape, not just for their role ecologically, because of their role ecologically, but not just for non-humans, but for humans as well. The original inhabitants, Native Americans, it was the older I get and the more I learn about the importance of acorns as a first food and the relationship with Oregon oaks to fire, it's just incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Such an important tree and one that I've been learning a lot more about recently as well. Okay, so Glenn, we'll hop back over to you. What is what you would say the most interesting thing that you bring with you into the field, whether in a cruiser's vest or in your field kit?
Well, these days, the high-tech tools, the laser distance finders and the hypsometers that we use for measuring distances and tree heights, those are really cool. And I have fortunately to have some now. And so it's a whole lot easier than, having a tape measure and a clinometer in the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, agreed. A lot less walking up and down hills, back and forth to trees. Okay, Scott, what about for you? Do you have an interesting tool that you bring with you when you're out checking out trees?
Yeah, I guess a set of binoculars, good binoculars, is really important for being able to really see closely what's going on in the crown of the tree, certain growth forms or habitat features or critters, organisms, and then as an avid tree climber, when I'm rigging trees to ensure that I'm over a safe branch without any defects or problems, binoculars can be a lifesaver. And then just for general bird watching and such, binoculars are definitely, if only had one thing I could bring, it would be the binoculars.
Yeah, it's life-saving in multiple ways there. It's a good point. Yeah, very useful tool. Okay, so our last question for you all is do you have specific resources that you would recommend to our listeners if they're interested in diving deeper into today's topic about storm damage, forest health, tree stability or things of that nature? Glenn, you can go first again.
Yeah, well, again, take advantage of your local offices and our websites for OSU Extension and the Department of Forestry, both. Actually, Scott probably would refer to this, but I start with the Oregon Department of Forestry Urban Forest website pertaining to tree care after a storm or some of these other kind of urban tree care issues in particular. Of course, they have a lot about forestry as well. And then, you can post these, on your podcast site for the web links. A paper actually that people want to get into the weeds a bit with the forestry and with thinning and controlling the crowding in your forest. We have a publication on, competition and stand density in woodlands. And in general, look at our OSU Extension Forestry and Natural Resources publications on forest health and management. So I hope you'll post both of those websites for exploring further.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put links to all of your suggestions on our episode page on the website.
Yep. And then stay tuned for upcoming events in your neighborhood, because we do a lot of education programs, such as our tree school and monthly or seasonal programs, live and in person.
Yeah, those are great. And I'm excited for the one coming up. Do you have any classes at your next tree school on this sort of topic?
Yeah, there's something to be some around, in forest settings, around, thinning and stand density management, as well as, wildlife habitat and fire and fuels reduction and, some things related to that. Maybe nothing specific about storms, but more about how to grow a strong tree.
Okay. Very important, as Scott was talking about prevention. Okay, Scott, you're up. Any resources that you think would be helpful for people who want to learn a little bit more after today?
Yeah, so I too would refer folks to our local extension resources and our Oregon Department of Forestry website. One of my favorites, we talked a fair amount about arboreal habitat and how important dead and dying wood is for forest ecology and how it supports the web of life. One of my favorite publications is called The Veteran Trees, A Guide to Good Management, and it's available. I'll make sure to post a link. I won't get into the hyperlink now, but it's a 100-page document that is, it has some amazing illustrations and just a wonderful online resource to get the wheels turning. So I'll be sure to provide you with that link so folks can check out that. But once again, it's called Veteran Trees, A Guide to Good Management.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both of you. I really enjoyed our conversation today and really had the opportunity to learn a lot. I finally learned, Scott, what those cables are used for in forked trees. So thank you for discussing that preventative measure and talking about how to prevent tree failure in that situation. So appreciate both of you for joining me and teaching us all a lot about forest health, storm damage, and disturbance, and looking forward to finding an excuse to be able to talk to both of you again sometime. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So that concludes another episode of In the Woods. Don't forget to join us in a couple weeks to explore another topic on Oregon's amazing forests. Until then, what's in your woods? Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on our website, inthewoodspodcast.org. We'd love to hear from you. Visit the Tell Us What You Think tab on our website to leave us a comment, suggest a guest or topic, or ask a question that can be featured in a future episode. And give us your feedback by filling out our survey. The In the Woods podcast is produced by Lauren Grand, Jacob Putney, Scott Levengood, and Stephen Fitzgerald, who are all members of the Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension team. Episodes are edited and produced by Kellen Soriano. Music for In the Woods was composed by Jeffrey Hino, and graphic design was created by Christina Freehoff. We hope you enjoyed the episode and can't wait to talk to you again next time. Until then, what's in your woods?